So billionaire Tom Steyer has joined in on the race for president. We've got Eric Swalwell. He actually dropped out of the race. And then Tom Steyer, he's a billionaire. He's jumped into the race. I was actually thinking when Eric Swalwell announced that he was getting out of the race that this was a good thing because I do know that Montana Governor Steve Bullock has qualified to join the debates, which means somebody would have to be kicked off of the debate stage in order to fit him in. And my concern is that that would be somebody like Marianne Williamson, and I would like to see her remain on that debate stage. So when Eric Swalwell said he was getting out of the race, I thought, okay, good. Now they don't have to make that difficult decision. But now with this billionaire jumping in, they might have to still cut someone unless this guy cannot get the donations and he also can't get the polling, which he's probably not going to need the donations after all. He's a billionaire, but he certainly would need to poll well before the debates that happen at the end of this month. So I don't think this guy is going to get in, and I still think that maybe Marianne Williamson and Andrew Yang and Tulsi Gabbard and Tulsi, I think she's pretty safe for the debates, but I do think that Marianne is the one that's kind of teetering. So let's talk about Tom Steyer because he's interesting. Is he a progressive? So first, when looking this guy up, he's worth $1.6 billion. So you're like, okay, great. This is what we need. Another billionaire in office, right? The question is, how did he get his money? Well, Steyer is the founder and former co-senior managing partner of Farallon Capital and the co-founder of One California Bank, which became, through merger, Beneficial State Bank, an Oakland-based community development bank. Farallon Capital manages $20 billion in capital for institutions and high net worth individuals. The firm's institutional investors include college endowments and foundations. Okay, he's a banker. Great, even better. So not only is this guy a billionaire, but he's a billionaire banker. That sounds like exactly the type of person we want in Washington. But you know what? Let's take a deeper look at this guy because he has made some interesting statements and he's done some interesting things, and it piqued my interest. Is this guy a progressive? Well, him and his wife have pledged to donate half of their wealth to charity while they're alive. A lot of people say they'll do that, but after they're dead and they've spoiled their riches, on all the things that they've wanted. But they've actually committed to giving half of their wealth to charity while they're alive. He became really concerned with the environment and in 2013 launched Next Gen America, which is a PAC that supports candidates and policies that take action against climate change. He also pulled all of his money out from any investment that was determined to be environmentally unsound. He opposed the Keystone Pipeline. He opposed the Citizens United decision. But he has said that since others are able to spend their money and for endless amounts of money, that he is going to do the same. He's going to commit to kind of doing that same thing to combat them. He did spend a bunch of money on a campaign calling for impeaching of Donald Trump. He is for raising taxes on the rich, saying that the current tax system is like a reverse Robin Hood. In November of 2018, in a full-page USA Today ad listing 5 policy ideas Democrats should campaign on, that was the name of his article. It was he was talking about the 5 things that Democrats should campaign on, and, quote, which represent essential freedoms that should be guaranteed for all Americans. That included voting rights protections, a clean environment, a complete education, a living wage, and good health. So these are pretty good things that he's listing he believes in for people. So I dug a little deeper. Is Tom for Medicare for all? And in an interview with Mike, Steyer said, quote, when people say Bernie is crazy, no, Bernie is talking about inequality. That is the burning issue in the United States. Though he endorsed Hillary in the 2016 primaries, Steyer then went on to tell Mike that he has come to view Sanders' progressive platform as the necessary way forward. So he also said, quote, there is an absolute unspoken war between corporate interests and the American people. That's the underlying subtext for all of the public discussions within the Democratic Party. We're seeing a deliberate attempt to take away working families' future by really rich people. Unless we address that, I don't think we're dealing with the reality Americans are facing today. He did say he thinks Medicare for all is the only way forward and people should rally around Sanders' proposal. Regarding a living wage, he said, quote, we only have 4.3% unemployment, but what we do have is a whole bunch of people who have jobs they can't live on. Democrats, he said, must embrace a solidly progressive agenda if they want to win back the Congress and ultimately the presidency. He also said Democrats have to move from resistance to offense. Being not Trump is not nearly enough. We have to put forward our positive vision for the future. If we can't do that, then I don't understand the point. Now, that all sounds very progressive to me. It sounds to me like he is absolutely what I would consider a progressive, but let's take a look at his foreign policy. He said the war in Iraq and Afghanistan were disastrous. In a 2018 interview with Huffington Post, he said this when they asked him the question on the issue you seem passionate about is the Israeli government's killing of protesters in Gaza this week. Why do you think it was I'm spitting over my words here. It was a pivotal moment. He said our foreign policy is changing from being a relationship-based partnership policy around the world to a military policy. Here's a perfect example where we believe the United States and its allies have the right to dictate what's supposed to happen, whether that's our relationship with climate policy, NAFTA, Iran, China, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Does it surprise that now we're in a proxy war in Syria and now in Gaza Strip where we're using force to insist that we're right? It doesn't surprise me because the implication of our foreign policy is we will do what we want and we will dictate outcomes to everybody else in the world. And they said, what do you mean by a proxy war? And he says, when you look at what happened, we pulled out of the Iran nuclear treaty, and that causes an opening for missiles trading back and forth in Syria between Iran and Israel. And we moved our embassy to Jerusalem, and that caused protests in Gaza, which were put down with extreme force. And so I think that if you look at all the different instances I gave you, America is stating that we represent only ourselves, and we will use our might to ensure we get our way. That's the real change in terms of what we said are in the world, where we'd been trying to be an example of democracy and liberty. Billions of people have a screen and they're looking at what's going on and they're drawing their own conclusions about who we are. They asked, what should we do about Israel? Leverage American aid to change their behavior? And he said, people are always talking about what we should do. In most instances, in foreign economics, there's not one thing you should do. The question is what role you're going to play and what are the principles under which you're going to play it. But one of the questions we need to ask is, are we going to be a country that is trying to live up to its ideals, or are we a country that insists on its way and uses military might to make sure we get it? Yeah, guess what, guys? Tom Steyer is a total progressive. I mean, this billionaire banker, turns out he is absolutely a progressive. So this is good. But at the same time, I think for many of the candidates that are running for president, and several of them are way more progressive than what we've seen. Definitely not in 2016. It was Bernie Sanders was the lone progressive. And now we're seeing all these progressives come out of the woodwork, and whether they be full-blown progressives or pretty much, progressives. I would say Elizabeth Warren is real close. I don't think she's fully. Her foreign policy is terrible to me. She says she would take big money if she got to the general election. There's some things that are really contradictory from her, but she's pretty close. Like, she's kind of the furthest one before you get into the non-progressive candidates. But then there's several candidates who I do think are quite progressive. And some that I would like to take a closer look at, like Steve Bullock from Montana. I think he's got a lot of progressive ideas. I think Jay Inslee might very well be progressive. Bill de Blasio very well might be. There's these candidates that are really starting to mirror the things that Bernie Sanders has been saying his entire life. But why would you vote for any of these other candidates when you can have the real deal? Why wouldn't you just vote for Bernie Sanders? Bernie Sanders is the only one who we can guarantee is not going to change. That guy has never changed. You can listen to interviews from him back in the 80s. He's saying exactly the same thing. He has never, ever changed. So why would you go with another candidate who is copying all of Bernie Sanders' ideas, copying Bernie Sanders' platform, and yet we don't know what they're really going to do once they finally get into a position of power. We don't know how they're going to react when they're pressured. What we do know is Bernie Sanders has never cracked. That's what we know. We know that this guy has been through everything. He's been through all the pressure. He's been through all the criticism. He's been through hellfire and back with his ideas. They've called him names. They've delegitimized him. He's been through all of it. And that man has never changed. In decades, he has never changed. So why would you vote for any of these copycats who I think it's great. I mean, and I'll say why I think it's great. Because there are a lot of people out there who just have a bad taste in their mouth about Bernie Sanders. They were Hillary Clinton supporters. Maybe they've become more progressive in their ideas, but they still have a bad taste in their mouth about Bernie. And they're like, oh, the Bernie bros, they get all uptight about all that stuff. So when you've got these other alternative candidates, what I've noticed is that those people who have found that they actually do agree with Bernie Sanders, they're just salty about him, and so they don't want to support him, even though they totally agree with everything in his platform, they're more willing to support one of these other candidates. Well, that's a problem, right? Because that would split the vote. But it's not a problem if all of these auxiliary candidates who are just mirroring and copying and mimicking Bernie Sanders, if those candidates soak up all of these other voters and gain support from people that clearly, if you're a Bernie Sanders fan, you're already a Bernie Sanders fan. You're voting for Bernie Sanders, and you're not going to turn and say, okay, Tom Steyer's my guy, or Elizabeth Warren's my gal, or whoever it might be, right? You're for Bernie. But if you're not for Bernie and you're for one of these other candidates, then perhaps what could happen, and what I hope happens, is that these candidates then get all of those other voters and then they drop out of the race and they endorse Bernie Sanders. That is the only way forward. That is the only way this is going to work. Otherwise, they will split the progressive vote. They will. And that could be very, very damaging to the movement, obviously. And some people think that that's the point, that all of these progressive candidates are really not progressive, but they're there trying to split the vote away from Bernie Sanders. Maybe, maybe not. I don't think that's the case. I just think that now with Elizabeth Warren, I'm wondering a little bit if that's what she's become for some of these people. They realize that, I think they were first afraid of her, but then she's made some remarks that make them think, maybe she could be controlled once she got into office. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad. We'd be able to kind of get her. Yeah, okay, we'd have to concede on a couple of things, but she wouldn't go full bore like the way Bernie Sanders would. We can maybe manipulate her especially when it comes to things like foreign policy, for example. So, I kind of wonder if she's kind of gotten a bit more support and people are throwing their weight behind her because they figure, well, she's better than Bernie ultimately for their bottom line and for their pocketbook. But I really do hope that these candidates that are coming forward that are very progressive, I hope that they do gain supporters that Bernie otherwise wouldn't. I'm hoping that they're not going to take away from Bernie, but I'm hoping that they're going to gain people that wouldn't vote for Bernie. And then I hope that they drop out of the race, turn around and say, why would you vote for the copycat when you could have the real deal? So, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this show, you can please subscribe, hit the bell. Also, you can support me on PayPal or Patreon. I do have those set up and the links are down below. And thank you so much for watching.